Hello, and welcome to week 3 of Search, Expose, Heal. This week's topic is healing from the unknown. Um, it sounds mysterious, it sounds maybe even scary to some people, but the reality is we are all um, attributing our symptoms to something we believe is the cause of depression, anxiety, mood swings, and various other things. However, what we have to acknowledge is that if we did the work, if we went in to see a professional, if we dug just a little bit deeper, there are additional causes. This may just be a symptom of something bigger. Not so much to say that every person is walking around not understanding their emotions, not understanding what's going on with them, but we have to acknowledge and be open to the fact that we don't know everything. We have to be open to the unknown. We have to know that in our healing process, there are going to be layers to our trauma. There are going to be layers to how we are today versus how we were before. There are going to be layers to everything that we do. So it's important that we take the time professionally, spiritually, as well as physically to understand what's going on in our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. So, with that being said, today's speaker is going to talk about his experience of going into therapy and going with one reason in mind and discovering so many underlying issues that were leading to just one aspect that he was able to acknowledge, one symptom. And the reality is, a lot of times when we go to therapy, we're going to treat a symptom that we just need to go away for the moment and discover that we've got to do some work to get to the root cause, to get rid of the symptoms, but also to get rid of the disease. So, with that being said, I'd like to introduce a very dear friend of mine, Mr. James Williams, as he talks about healing from the unknown.
Hi, Pause. My name is James Williams. I'm really honored that Devin asked me to share tonight in the conference. Um, I've known Devin since 1996, since we were both in high school. I'll let you guys count the years. Um, I am 40 years old. It feels weird to say because I definitely don't feel 40 most of the time. Um, Devin asked me to speak tonight on the subject of healing from the unknown. And kind of sounds uh, like a book title, but it has a kind of a elusive kind of feel to it when you think about being healed from the unknown. Because how can you be healed from what you don't know about? So I'll start with just a small amount of background about myself. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a regular guy. Um, I am a full-time musician. So I'm definitely on the right brain creative side of things. Um, I've been in therapy now for a year and a half, individual therapy, and my wife and I are in marriage therapy at the same time. So um, I think it might be relevant to talk about what led me to therapy. Why am I in therapy? Um, the So the main thing that I showed up to therapy for um, was basically an unhappy marriage. um, I wasn't happy with my marriage. I wasn't happy with myself for being in an unhappy marriage. And I was experiencing a lot of self doubt, a lot of deep depression, periods of deep depression. Um, and So yeah, I mean that was the main reason I showed up to therapy. Started searching for a therapist. There were some more very specific things, but I won't share those right now. Um, I mean, I was in I'm in. Well, I'm still married, and we're working on it. So we are making a bit of progress. So unhappy marriage, and then I experienced a very major life change back in 2014. I was in a job that I loved for about 10 years, and the job went away, and I didn't realize it at the time until the job was gone. But um, uh, my whole identity of who I was had been wrapped up in that job. So when the job was gone, I honestly didn't know who I was or where I was going, what I was going to do next. I didn't know. I just had so so the job being gone was in a lot of ways it was a blessing in disguise. It didn't feel like it at the time, but it looking back at it, 6 years ago now, I can look back at it now and I can say that it needed to happen because it was it was too much a part of me. This external thing was too much a part of me, and it defined who I was. Like if you came up and asked me who I was, at some point I would mention that job, So, and not out of arrogance or anything, because it's a very reputable name, but it's how I thought of myself. It's what at that time of my life, it's what I thought gave me significance. So, so that went away, and immediately following that, I was in a I was deeply depressed. I was in a deep depression. Um, didn't quite know how to pull myself out of it. I had some great friends that led me to some things. Wound up going to a retreat with some friends in the mountains of Colorado, and it was a very important time for me. I got to connect with some people that I normally wouldn't connect with, and learned some really important things about myself. And I'm still learning those things about myself. And that led me to start doing some personal development classes. Um, and I'm still taking those classes. I just took one just a few months ago, and this is kind of a series of classes. So anyway, it's just things that have helped me, um, from that really low point um, to some kind of self-realization, to learn some things about myself, and while all this is going on, my marriage problems were increasing, and I guess I should be a little bit more specific. I'm not going to be too specific, but there was definitely some abuse that I was going through from my wife. So the abuse was increasing, and my the self-doubt was also increasing, because deep down I was wondering, why am I allowing this? What kind of man would allow this? And because I grew up in a family where the men were men, and the men are men, they still are, and I don't remember any conversation. I don't remember ever hearing about any kind of therapy at all. We my dad and the other men in my family, their basic thing was just, man up, tough through it, be tough, toughen your skin, or fight back, or whatever it is. Um, and that's not that's not my natural way of being, you know. Um, so so I found a therapist, and I started going, and I thought I was there for my marriage problems. I thought I was there to deal with my marriage, and it was so long ago, and we've dealt with so much over the last year and a half in therapy that it's actually really hard for me right now to remember a lot of the details about why I actually showed up on that first day. because, and this leads us to our subject, healing from the unknown. Because I showed up with the, maybe A, B, and C, these things that I wanted, that I thought I needed to deal with. And as I said, and, as I engaged in therapy, I found out that, well, there's C, D, E, F, and G over here that I wasn't even aware of, you know? And turns out that these other things are actually more important than the A and B that I showed up with. So sometimes, in Healing from the Unknown, that subject, just the title of that sounds pretty elusive. It sounds like like something we can't understand. But Healing from the Unknown, as I'm thinking about it now, it's the actual work that we go to therapy for. It's because the unknown is what's causing the symptoms that we show up to therapy with. Because a lot of times we'll show, maybe we're experiencing anxiety or depression or addictive behaviors or even like attention-seeking behaviors, things like that. These symptoms that we show up to therapy for, and we find out that these things are brought on by very specific events or a series of events that we may or may not have any memory of. So I know. So I showed up to therapy to deal with my marriage and me in the marriage and the question of why am I allowing this, and should I leave? Is basically what I just, those are some of the questions I needed to answer for myself. I have a 8-year-old son, and my primary concern is his well-being if I decide to leave. So showing up to deal with marriage problems and other things, I found out that there's lots of childhood trauma that I had no memory of that's affected me today. My mother issues, father issues, all these things, So the unknown are a lot of times the actual root of the symptoms that we show up to deal with, because anxiety is a problem, depression is a problem, addictive behaviors are a problem, and we do need to focus on those things to I guess to get it to a point where we can function in our life. But once we're at a point where we can function, then it's really important to this non-therapist. It's really important that we then focus on what's causing those things, because you can, if you have a cold, you can go and wipe your nose all day long, but if you're not dealing with the cold virus, or I don't know, there's no cure for the cold virus, but if you're not dealing with the actual thing that's making us sick, then you can wipe our nose all day, and we'll probably wipe it for the next 2 or 3 weeks, unless we deal with the actual virus or whatever that's making us sick. So our mental health is the same way. We show up with the idea of what we want to attack, and we find out that the actual enemy is actually behind the army over there. Is you have to deal with the kingdom and not just the people right in front of you. So just a couple more thoughts, and I'll be done. So with all that in mind, in therapy, I think it's really important to be open in therapy to the idea that the problem that you're there to solve may not be what you think it is. The problem may be completely different than what you think it is. And at least that's what it was in my case. I showed up for one thing, and there are some days, well, actually, it's a whole lot of times I show up to therapy, and my wife is not even on my mind. It's not even, she's not there. She's not why I'm there at all. You know. So, and also there, and there were some, there were a bunch of weeks that I get to end of the session and it doesn't quite feel like it's worth the money. Like that particular 55 minutes or 50 minutes didn't feel like it was worth the amount that I'm about to pay. And I always paid and I always came back, because those are usually the weeks that I find, over the course of the week, um, that my reaction to things have has are my reaction to things that happen throughout the week is different, right? Um, just my natural reaction to, to triggers, things that maybe used to be triggers or still are triggers, but um, either my reaction is completely different or it's much less severe than it has been. So, um, it's just it was. I usually find a reason to keep going when I have those weeks that it's. So, in conclusion, um, the main thing that comes to me now is just be open to the unknown. Be open to what you're not aware of. Be open to your therapist. You know, we may not always understand their techniques and what they're saying to us. And I found that my therapist, over time, I've realized she knows what she's doing. And usually, just about everything she says has a purpose. So I've learned to trust her over time. Um, and it doesn't mean that I just showed up as a blank canvas, just, letting her say whatever. It took time. It's an actual relationship that she and I have, and it took time for me to develop trust in her. You know, and it took time for her to get to know me. It's a two-way street. We're getting to know each other, and I'm learning to trust her and her input. And over the last year and a half, the therapy that I've engaged in has absolutely changed my life. And and so now, those weeks when it doesn't feel like it's worth the money or the time, I have a year and a half behind me, of experience. So it's I know it's worth it. You know. So in conclusion, be open to the unknown. And I hope this helped somebody. I hope this helped a lot of you. And yeah, I'm on Facebook, James Williams III. Um, I'm open to if you want to reach out and ask questions. I'm willing to answer. Within reason, of course. And I'll see you soon. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, James, for being transparent and open about your therapy process and this process of healing from what we're calling the unknown. I understand you said the reason you went to seek therapy was because of trouble in your marriage, but what you laid out were a lot of underlying issues that were more you than your marriage. So being able to discover that makes a whole lot of sense, because what we've got to realize as people, we can be consumed by, um, lost in, and wrapped up in things, in relationships, in marriages, in children, in jobs, in causes. We can become that. That becomes our identity, and it's important that everyone knows that this is a part of your identity. You know, I can be open about the fact that for a very long time, the first thing I would tell people is that I was a single mother of two. I was wrapped up in that identity. Um, when I first graduated from college, I graduated with a master's degree in accounting. It was one of those things that I just became so consumed by and wrapped up in. Um, and what we forget is who we are outside of that. So when those things fall apart, when those things become troubled, when those things aren't turning out the way we want them to be, we don't know where to go after that. We don't have the center that we needed. We don't have the center that we used to have because that became an all consuming situation in our lives. Um, so, something I want to just speak on and um, not necessarily gloss over, but I want to talk about it and I want to move on. So, James admitted to something that we as a society um, ignore, pretend isn't there, or we downplay it. So, he spoke about being abused in his marriage. He didn't speak on physical, verbal, emotional abuse. He just said there was abuse. So, with that being said, for one, I want to commend you, James, for opening up and saying that out loud because as a man, our society laughs at a man who says his wife abuses him. And I want to, as a woman, acknowledge that we know that women can be just as abusive as men. We know that women can be just as physically violent as men. We know that women can make the same exact mistakes as men do in marriages and relationships. So I want to acknowledge that that happened to you and say that it is wrong. And um, as a society, we need to say that it is wrong. And the same actions taken um, against men who commit uh, domestic abuse, those same actions need to be taken against the women that do that as well. And this is not specifically speaking to his abuse or trauma because I don't know details about that, but I'm saying that as a society, we have to level the playing field in the fact that we all can be abusers and it needs to be discussed, talked about, um, and we need to acknowledge it and take actions against it, just as we do with male on female domestic violence. The next thing I want to point out and talk about is the theory and the thing we teach our boys in this society. I know I have a son, but you know, I can honestly say that I've grown up watching with obviously my peers and my brother that we have a society that speaks to men having to man up. We teach our boys to not cry. You don't cry unless you're bleeding. You don't cry unless you're physically hurt or a bone is broken. And the reality is, we're raising boys to not acknowledge their emotions and then we shun them because they cannot be emotionally available in their adult relationships and for their children. So I want to say that and I want to leave that there. I just want you to think about that when the next time you see a young man crying or a young man hurt and your first mind is to tell him to toughen up and don't let people see him cry because it's unfair. Um, but moving on from that, James talked about going to therapy to fix his marriage and discovering his low self esteem, discovering how much he had lost himself in a job, um, discovering childhood trauma. So, one of the things he said was there were things he had forgotten about, things he didn't remember that he's uncovered through his therapy. And I was watching Grey's Anatomy. I'm sorry, I was watching Station 19 last week, and the um in the storyline, a young woman loses her father in a fire, and her mother, so she thought, had died when she was very very young. Um, as these things unfolded, she was talking to Meredith Grey of Grey's Anatomy because it's kind of a sister show, and Meredith tells her about the trauma that she endured and how your brain reacts to trauma and what the brain does to protect you from your emotions and yourself. And we can suppress things, we can forget things, we can twist things into new experiences in our brain when we experience trauma. So it is not uncommon to go and discover what you knew as a kid to be some fictitious narrative that didn't happen that way. So I want to encourage people that your therapist is not going to put things in your brain. Your therapist is not going to trick you into believing things that aren't true. But you need to be open to the fact that maybe you are remembering it in a way that makes it palatable. Maybe you're remembering it in a way that doesn't hurt as bad as it did. So it's scary, but it happens. And that would be, again, that unknown thing, because you saw it one way. And as you step through it again, as you relive it, you understand it differently. You see it differently. I can look back on experiences from 5, 6, 10 years ago that I didn't forget, things that I experienced and took in and felt like I processed. But now when I look at those situations, I understand a little bit more about what went on. I can see a different side of it. I can see a perspective of it that I didn't see before. I can acknowledge the lesson in a situation that I thought was just hurtful and painful. I can also see where I messed up and own my role in that. He spoke about dealing with the symptoms and not the cause, and how that prolongs um, your suffering. So when you go into a therapist's office and you say, I'm depressed, they're going to say, why do you say that? They're going to ask you questions. They're trying to get to the root of what is triggering this episode more so than this is how we treat depression. Why? Because everybody's treatment from depression and anxiety is going to be completely different. And what you want to understand is what is causing this emotion? What is causing this problem for me? What's causing this trauma? How do I fix it versus fix my depression? Um, I love that he was transparent about how he goes to therapy some weeks and questions why he's paying for it. I've had sessions that I came out heavy and hurting because I went through something or talked about something that I hadn't talked about in a long time that was hurtful. I've had sessions where I came out feeling lighter because I unburdened myself of stuff that was weighing me down. I've had sessions where I just went and we talked. I went home. Um, but as James said, sometimes the session isn't what gets you. The session isn't what demonstrates the progress. It's your changed reaction to things. It's your changed behavior in familiar circumstances. It is not being bothered by things that used to get under your skin. So that's when you know therapy is working. That's when you know therapy is helping. Um, every therapist isn't about let's go hard or go home every session, because you're going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to need to recover from 2 sessions ago for a little bit before you can dig under a little bit further or peel back another layer. It's emotionally trying, it's emotionally draining, and you have to be aware of that. Um, Overall, I think from what James shared and what we have to know about healing from the unknown from a patient perspective, you've got to be patient with that process. You've got to understand that that process is not going to be as simple and as smooth as you'd like for it to be. It's not going to be as much fun as you'd like for it to be sometimes, but that process is to get you to a better place. That process is to expose the things that you aren't acknowledging, the things that you don't understand, um, and help you move forward. So be open to the things you might uncover in your therapy. Be open to the things you uncover about yourself, the things you learn that aren't pretty, the things you learn about you that you hate in other people. So that's what this process is about. And with pause, I like to, that A stands for a number of things, but most of all, it stands for acceptance. But over time, you come to you come to realize that before you get to the acceptance part, you've got to become aware of it. So much of therapy is becoming aware of who you are under pressure, who you are dealing with trauma, who you are outside of trauma and in a happy place. So the awareness that therapy brings is important, but it's unknown until you uncover it. And once you're aware of it, you move forward. So this is why this week was important to me. This is why I wanted to talk to you about healing from the unknown, because we always go in with an agenda. We always go in with a plan. But just like when you go to a doctor and you say I have a stomach ache, and they go through all the tests, and they're going to test everything. They're going to get an X-ray. Might send you for an MRI. You don't tell the doctor, no, 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 no. I just have a stomach ache. I don't need you to explore and find anything else. You're never going to do that. Why? Because you want to get to the root of what's causing that problem. If the doctor says, hey, it might be something other than what you ate last night, you want to know so you can fix it, so you can feel better. So if you go into to the therapist office and say I'm depressed, and they say, okay, well, let's talk about your childhood, let's talk about your job, let's talk about your family, your marriage, your relationship with your mom, let's talk about your kids. You have to be open to that. Those are the tests you go through to get to the cause of your depression or your anxiety or your dissociative disorders. There are things that we have to do in order to heal from the unknown. We don't always know physically, we don't always know mentally, but we have to go through the tests. We have to go through the process. And I think it's important that we do that with an open mind and patience. So, with that being said, I want to encourage you to go check out pausewellness.org. There are blogs on there where I talk about accepting and things like that, and just my journey through this. But also, I want you to continue to follow along this week, because our therapist is an amazing woman, and she often gives us, and not just often, she continually gives us things to think about and things to discuss amongst ourselves, with our peers, with our family about mental health. So I want you to stay tuned for that tomorrow. Also on Wednesday, we'll have spiritual reflections from our pastor, or not our pastor, Pastor AJ, who has a very open mind about what mental health means spiritually and how we go about healing spiritually while we're healing from setbacks and trauma and grief and all the things that life throws at us mentally. So, and then we have our live Q&A on Thursday, which last week was extremely productive. It will be a Zoom call. You can join the Zoom, or you can watch us live on the Pause Wellness blog page. All of these will be posted in the Pause virtual check-in group on the Pause Wellness blog page and within this event. So I just want everyone to be encouraged and understand that just because you don't know what's wrong doesn't mean you can't know what's wrong. So with that being said, I hope this was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed our speaker tonight. Thank you again, James, for being so open and transparent. And we will see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m.